The next time you're at the Dollar Tree, check out their selection of fabric because today I'm sharing gorgeous DIY crafts using Dollar Tree fabric that are perfect for any space in your home. These are beginner-friendly DIY home decor projects, no sewing required, and totally budget-friendly. I always like browsing through the stretched printed canvases they have at the Dollar Tree. They have a lot of pretty prints and pictures on them, but they are a little small. So from the Crafters Square section of the Dollar Tree, I grabbed one of these large wooden squares, and I am going to be using a roll of the Dollar Tree fabric to make this piece a little bit bigger and a little more eye-catching. Since the background of the canvas print that I chose was white, I decided to make a white background on my wood square. Now I am going to put some fabric over this, so I didn't need to cover the whole square in paint. I'm just going around the edges about 2 inches in all the way around. My wooden square measures about 12 inches by 12 inches, so I unrolled my fabric and I'm cutting it down to 11.5 inches by 11.5 inches. Then I folded the fabric in half and I used my pinking shears to cut along all 4 sides because I wanted it to have a decorative edge. Now, if you don't have pinking shears or if you don't want to do this, you could leave the fabric just cut with a straight edge, or you could go along the edges and pull out some threads and it would create a fringy edge for you too if you like that decorative look but maybe you don't have pinking shears. I always find it's easier to fold the fabric 1 or 2 times, then I don't have to try to cut straight along the edge the whole length. I'm just cutting a straight cut just a few inches rather than the whole length. Once my paint was all dry, I used some Mod Podge and I added a pretty generous amount to my wood square, and I'm using a sponge brush just to lay an even coat all around the surface. Now, like I mentioned, I only painted around the border of my wood square because I knew you wouldn't be able to tell the difference through this fabric because it is such a busy dark print. But if you're using a fabric that is a lighter print or is a little bit more sheer, you might want to test it first just to make sure that you don't need to paint your whole wood square. After I had my Mod Podge down, then I just smoothed the fabric all through the center of the wood square. And the last thing I needed to do to finish off this project was to add some hot glue to the back side of my butterfly printed canvas and just center it within the wooden square. One thing I can always find at my Dollar Tree are these floral foam wreath forms. I always find this in the aisle with the flowers and the other wreath making supplies. And from the fabric section, I found these rolls of neon rainbow fabric that I thought would make a really pretty summer wreath. One thing to keep in mind with these wreath forms is they are pretty small. They're just under 10 inches. So it's not going to create a really large wreath, but with the bright colored fabric, it'll really pop on your front door. To get started on my wreath, I unrolled one of the colors of fabric and I cut in from the edge about 2 inches, just a little notch, and then I just tore it down the rest of the length of the fabric. Now you'll see here I'm tearing strips out of the whole piece of fabric. You don't have to do that. I only needed about 4 strips of each color. It's just when I started this, I wasn't sure how much fabric I'd need, so I ended up ripping up the whole thing, but that was okay because there's a lot of things you can do with fabric scraps too. Now, if you don't like the torn edge, feel free just to cut strips that are about 2 inches long, but I did like the rustic feel that ripping the fabric gave it. After I had all my strips tore, then I just started wrapping my wreath with the different colors. I started with one color. I added a little hot glue to the backside of the wreath form, and I just continued wrapping the fabric around it till I got to the end and added a little more hot glue. And then I alternated the colors. So once I had my first strip down, rather than continuing on with the same color, I moved on to a second color, and I do have 4 different colors here, so I was able to add 4 different colors the whole way around my wreath. Now keep in mind, this is something you can do with any style of fabric, and you don't even have to alternate colors or patterns. You could just wrap the whole wreath in one pattern or one color. Whatever you prefer would work fine. After I had the whole wreath wreath form wrapped in fabric, I wanted to create a bow using the same fabric. So I took 4 of the strips in the 4 different colors. For the first strip, I just cut it in half, and then I used that as my guide as to where I needed to cut the other 3 strips. So you can see I laid the shortest one down, and then I just cut each one about 1.5 inches to 2 inches longer than the previous one. Now, using the scraps from each of these strips, I just cut in about 1/2 inch and tore it down, and this is just essentially making a string that I can use to tie around the center of my bow. Even on the shortest pieces here, I still did that. It was enough just to add around the center of my bow, and I did that for all 4 colors. Now this is going to be a layered bow tie style bow, so starting with my smallest fabric, I just folded the 2 ends in, and then I pinched it in the center like an accordion, and then using that 1/2 inch piece of scrap that I had tore off, I'm gluing that around the center to hold everything in place. So I'll show you again here on the next largest one. You can see I'm just folding the 2 ends in, and I'm pinching it in the center, kind of like how you would fold an accordion. I added a little bit of hot glue, and then using that coordinating fabric that I had tore off the scrap, I wrapped it around the center, added a little bit more hot glue, and then cut off the excess, and now I have a cute little bow tie style bow made out of fabric. And I repeated that with all 4 colors. Once I had all of my bows put together, I just started with the largest bow. I added a little hot glue, and then I just layered it up from there, going from largest to smallest. The last thing I needed to do to finish off my wreath was just add a little bit of hot glue to the backside of my bow and add it to the bottom of my wreath. If you're a paper crafter like me, you probably love to mix and match prints and patterns, and I loved how well these 3 prints went together. I wanted to create a set of stacked books to act as a riser. You've seen me do this before. I love to do this. I always use this in my different photos and displays. I always had to have a set of books somewhere in my house. These 3 books are from the Dollar Tree. You can see they're all the same size. I like to have either 3 of the same size, or I like to have 2 books that are different sizes. So it's up to you however you'd like to do yours. To get started, I'm just taking one of the prints of a fabric, and I laid my book down on top of it so that I could get an idea of how wide I needed my fabric to be. Now, if you wanted to take the time to actually sew the edges in or glue the edges in to make them more neat, you could definitely do that, but I really like the rustic look of having some of the threads show from the fabric, so I'm just cutting mine. And you can see I folded one end of the fabric in, and I'm just holding it in place on the inside cover with some clear tape. And then I stretched it across the front of the book and tucked the other side in. I did have to cut a little bit of the excess off. And then I did the same thing again. I just opened up the cover and added a little clear tape. After all 3 of my books were covered, I just used some wide burlap ribbon to hold them all together. I cut a piece long enough that I could wrap it around all 3 books, and then I just tied it in a simple knot and dovetailed the ends. Now you can decorate this as much as you'd like. You could tuck some flowers in. You could wrap different ribbons around it if you want. I really wanted to let the prints on this fabric be the star of the show, so that's why I just used a simple burlap ribbon. And the great thing about this project is there was no glue involved, so at any time you could take this apart and reuse the fabric and reuse the books to decorate them for another time. Another no-sew fabric project you can create is a simple tassel garland for across the front of a fireplace mantle or a bookshelf. I grabbed 3 different prints from the Dollar Tree, and this fabric's a little bit different. It feels a little bit like flannel, and it has a softer feel to it, which I really liked, and I really liked the muted colors. Now, besides the fabric, all I needed was some sort of twine and some sort of rope. Now, for each of the tassels, you'll need 6 strips. Since I had 3 different prints of fabric, I had decided to make 6 tassels all together. So I knew I needed 36 strips of fabric. And because I had 3 prints, I just cut out 12 strips of each print. So just keep that in mind when you're creating your tassels. For me, I found that 6 strips was enough, but if you like a fuller tassel or maybe one that's not so bulky, you can either add more strips or take more away. You might not be able to tell, but I do have my fabric folded in half, and I'm just using my rotary cutter to cut 1-inch wide strips. Now to get started on my tassels, I wanted to layer all of my strips first, and I'm layering them with the print side down. I'm using 2 of each print, so I started with the one on the left side, I layered the other 2 prints on top of it, and then I repeated that pattern. I gathered up my pile of strips and I folded them in half, and I placed the center over my 2 fingers. Then I took my piece of rope and I laid it on top of the tails, and then I just pulled the tails through that first loop I made. Essentially, I just made a slip knot over top of my rope, and this way I can slide the tassel back and forth. It's not on there so tight that it won't move. So this way it doesn't matter where I'm putting it on the rope, because once I hang the garland, I'll be able to adjust all of my bundles. Now, if you have some dexterity issues and you don't think you'll be able to do this type of knot over the rope, another alternative would just be to take your pile of tassels, lay the whole thing over the rope, and then use a piece of twine to tie it at the base. This way, you'll still be able to slide your tassels around as you need to, and it'll still have basically the same look. It'll just be a little bit easier than trying to create that slip knot over top of your rope. I'm using 2 lengths of baker's twine to tie just a simple bow at the base of my slip knot. So this is kind of the same idea I was talking about. If you don't want to create that slip knot, just take all of your strips, fold them over your rope, and then tie that bow right at the base up against the rope. It'll give you basically the same look, and you'll still be able to slide your tassels around so you can adjust them depending on how wide the piece is that you're going to hang it from. By now you'll have a big pile of scrap fabric like I do, so I wanted to make some greeting cards using these A2 cards and envelopes that you can get at the Dollar Tree. If you're not a paper crafter or a card maker, an A2 size card just means that when it's folded, it measures 5.5 by 4.25 inches. I wanted to create some base pieces that I could glue my fabric to first, so I'm just using some white cardstock and I'm cutting it down to 4 inches by 5.25. I'm only going to be making 4 greeting cards today, so I only needed 4 of those pieces to start with. Now it's up to you what scraps of fabric you want to use. I really like the scraps that I had left over from my covered books, so those are the scraps that I'm going to use for this set of greeting cards. I just took some of the pieces that were bigger than the 4.25 by 5.5 inches, and you can see here I'm just cutting them into strips that are about 1/2 inch wide. It doesn't have to be perfect. It could be anywhere from 1/4 inch to 1 inch. There's really no right or wrong when it comes to this. This is just going to be a fun, scrappy greeting card. I'm using the Fabri-Tac Glue by Beacon to glue all of my fabric strips to the base that I created. Now this isn't the card base, this is the piece of cardstock that I had cut down to 5.25 by 4 inches. So you can see here, I just laid a small amount of the fabric tack down, and then I'm laying my strips into it. I'm alternating between the 3 patterns, and my strips are just a bit wider than the card base, which is what I wanted. I wanted a little overhang, and I just worked my way across the width of the card. Now I've used this glue a lot in paper crafting. I've made a lot of junk journals and mini albums before, and the reason I like this glue so much is, one, it's for fabric, so it's perfect for this type of project, but for the other reason is because it tends to not warp cardstock. It will warp paper, but when I'm working with cardstock, it never wrinkles or creases or warps or anything like that. Some of the other wet glues, like the tacky glue and sometimes even certain glue sticks, when you put it on cardstock, it'll start to warp and bend the cardstock. So I really like that the Fabri-Tac doesn't do that. It keeps the integrity of the cardstock, and it's really easy to work with, especially when you're mixing materials like fabric and cardstock. I know you can find Fabri-Tac at most craft stores like Michael's and Hobby Lobby, but it is available on Amazon too, so I'll leave a link to this glue in the description box in case you're interested in that. After all 4 of my card bases were covered in fabric strips, I needed to cut off the excess fabric, and rather than just cutting them off with plain scissors, which you could absolutely do, I decided to get out my pinking shears and run that along the 4 edges just for a little extra decoration. Now keep this craft in mind too if you have some kiddos that you're hanging out with this summer. You could definitely let them have fun just playing around with different scraps of fabrics and creating different card backgrounds. Or you could even go a little bit bigger with this and have them make some signs. You could give them a bigger piece of cardstock and let them just cover it with different fabric scraps, and then you could hang it up. I'm sure they would have a lot of fun doing that. I know when I was a kid, one of my favorite things to do over the summer was any kind of craft project. My mom was always really great with coming up with things that her and I could do together over summer vacation. If you don't already have a stash of stickers and paper crafting supplies, you can go to the Dollar Tree and look for these wooden sayings that they have. I always find mine next to the stickers, and I think these would make really great card fronts. Now, because I am a paper crafter, I do have a big sticker collection. So I grabbed some phrases from a sticker pack that I had, and I just mounted them up on some cardstock so that it created a small border around each saying. Then I'm going to take those sayings and I'm just going to hot glue them on an area of the card. You could put these anywhere you'd like. You could do either side, in the center, whatever you feel like doing. And because this is such a busy background, I didn't want to add too many embellishments, so I just tied a simple bow out of some baker's twine and I attached that to each one of the sayings. Now I can just attach all of my card fronts to the actual cards. I'm just using hot glue here because it was handy, but really you could use any kind of glue. You could use that Fabri-Tac again. You could use another paper crafting glue, a double-sided tape, whatever you have on hand would be fine. Another idea I had was if you wanted to make these cards and give them as a gift to somebody, I think a really neat way to package them up would be to take your pile of cards and envelopes and take some more of those fabric strip scraps and just tie the whole bundle together with some of the fabric. I think that's a really cute idea and a great way to give a handmade gift. Thanks so much for coming to hang out in the craft room with me again today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Dollar Tree DIY ideas. All right, everyone, I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.